Now, the next guest, we've got a lot of good guests today, by the way. After 12 o'clock, we'll be talking to Te Pāti Māori principal, if you like, Mirapeka Raukawa Tate, a Māori lady who has been prominent in our country for, 25 years in a variety of different roles, widely respected, has joined Te Pāti Māori and was on the list announced last weekend. We'll be talking about her why and what has prompted her to go from being what appeared to be a conservative politician into somebody who's joined Te Pāti Māori. We'll talk to Mirapeka after 12. Good lady, though, like her on an individual level. Mind you, that's true, I think, of all the political parties. After 11, we'll be talking to ACT about the big changes in education and the core curriculum that have been announced yesterday by Education Minister Giantonetti. We invited Giantonetti on the show. She said she wasn't available today. She was in caucus, which is fair enough. But the difference is that the ACT Party spokesperson on education, Chris Bailey, will step out of caucus for us after 11 o'clock. And now, our first guest. And I've been after this interview for a wee while. And just to tell you, our guest is coming from Croatia. His name is Dr. Jeff Seadon. And it's about you remember last week we did a story on, an exclamation of waste management of one of their marketing, well, it wasn't their marketing manager, I think he was their distribution manager, who said that recycling in New Zealand was a con and that it was just a joke and that most recycling ended up in landfills. It was expensive. It wasn't actually helping the environment. And it was one of the great, if you like, environmental cons that have been perpetrated upon New Zealand. Well, there's a bit of a pushback from that, but somebody who does know about this is somebody who's been writing about it for a long, long time. He is Dr. Jeff Seadon. He works at the Auckland University of Technology. I think they call it the AUT School for Future Environments. He's a senior lecturer there, has written on recycling for a long time, and he joins us, believe it or not, in the early hours of the morning from Croatia. Jeff, welcome to the show. Thank you very much for making yourself available.
Good morning, Michael. No, it's a pleasure to do that. As you said, I'm here in Croatia, but do keep a track on what's going on in New Zealand.
That's a good thing, isn't it, about the internet, that you can be anywhere in the world now and know in instant time what's happening back home.
It is, yes. And we're just over here escaping the New Zealand winter. And so we're returning in a couple of months in time for summer. So, yeah, it's good to keep up the track of what's going on.
Just tell me a little bit about why Croatia. Part of Yugoslavia broke up when Tito and all that fell apart. They ended up in a war, I think, with Serbia. Why Croatia?
Well, my wife was in Croatia, so she left before all of the troubles started. So she was there, hasn't been back since the late 1980s. And we did a quick trip in 2019, and then COVID came along, so we decided to spend a bit more time here.
And what was her impression of before and now? What was her take on that?
It's changed a lot in that time. Yes, it's changed considerably, and it's now joined the European Union, which was that's 10 years ago, but it's now within the Schengen zone. So that's creating its own set of challenges with the changeover in currencies as well.
What's the Schengen zone?
Dramatically.
What's that?
That's the zone which covers most of Western Europe, and what you have is once you enter the Schengen zone, you're able to go anywhere without going through customs and immigration. So it's a common border all around.
Right, so that would allow you to drive all the way to France?
Yes. And not come across a border guard along the way.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. Is it applied still to the Serbs, or the Serbs still out of favour at the moment?
Oh, no, Serbs are still out of favour, as you say. They're not even in the European Union. They are on the list to join, but when that'll happen is unknown.
Is Croatia, mainly Christian, Muslim, combination of both?
It's mainly Catholic.
Right. As distinct from Christian?
Yeah. Well, no. Oh, all right. Yeah. Okay. It's Christian, but they're mainly Catholic.
No. I mean, seriously, I come from a theological background, so I think you can probably make the argument anyhow. Listen, Jeff. Listen, the reason I've got you on the show is last week. In fact, let me explain. My wife is an elected district councillor of a small council in New Zealand, and a small territorial authority. And for reasons that are completely beyond me, she's, I won't say obsessed, but particularly interested in waste and management and landfills and recycling and trying to improve the environment and all that sort of stuff, things that completely escape her husband. And she has been a very strong and passionate advocate of recycling. And we've just ended up with our 4th bin in my household, like everybody else in Central Otago. 3 of the bins, I think, of the 4 are dedicated to recycling of some of the products. 1 glass, 1 green waste, and what was the other one? Just ordinary other recycling.
It's mixed recycling.
Yeah. But I've always argued to her, because I'm a conservative cynic, that you may as well just dump it all in a landfill, because I can't imagine that the overall imprint of recycling is going to improve the environment at all, given where it eventually ends up. Who's got it right, mate?
Well, as a married man, you'd understand, your wife's got it right. It is a stepping stone. Now, what we have with recycling, it is not the nirvana. It's not the end of the story. It's actually the start of the story. So the idea is that when you are recycling, you're actually doing the minimum that that people should be doing. We're talking much bigger things like reuse and preventing the waste in the first place. Now, we've got a very big reuse market in New Zealand that people don't really recognise. So when you go down to your hospitality shop, that's the reuse market. When you put stuff on Trade Me, that's the reuse market. So there's a fair bit of that. And then there's going one step further is for companies to say, well, look, do we really need to make this thing and put it on the market? But there's also the other bit that says, well, if we're going to do that, let's at least ensure that there is the least amount of waste being created right throughout its life cycle. So with the recycling, that's a useful starting point. We can go a lot further to reduce the waste that goes to landfill.
Right, but I'm particularly interested in plastics. That's where my argument usually is with the wife. I say, well, this is what you've been doing. You've been recycling the plastics. They've been taken by some entrepreneur, sent first to China, then the Chinese decided they didn't want the world to use plastic, and then it ends up in some landfills somewhere in Malaysia or somewhere like that. Haven't I got that right?
You've got that right, but there's more to that story as well, because once, as you said, once China said no more, we don't want the world's waste, we're just inundated with it, then what happened next was the Chinese businessmen who were doing the importing to China went off around the rest of Asia and set up business there. And many of the countries were quite happy for that to happen because they could see the economic boost that they could get from that. But very shortly, they found out that they were, in fact, just importing rubbish. And they had no markets for most of what was being imported. So then they shut up shop as well. And so it fell back to the countries that were producing it, like, for example, New Zealand, to actually come up with some solutions. So we see from that time there's been an evolution where people have started to think, well, what can we do with it? And instead of putting it into landfill. And there are companies like Fence Post that have taken plastics and putting them into making fence posts to replace the radiata pine posts. But there are also, government has started to move, and we can see that in New Zealand, where we've gradually had a movement away from all plastics through to targeting those plastics that can be recycled, so the ones, the twos and the fives. And the government's been moving towards that sort of end. So the idea being that if the plastic comes onto the marketplace, then at least we've got an end use for it.
But do we have end users in New Zealand for that?
Yes. I mean, for example, if we take PET, so that's the number ones, they can be recycled back into bottles. They can also be recycled into meat trays. You may have noticed a couple of years ago there was a sudden change where the polystyrene meat trays changed into the clear plastic ones, and that was PET.
So I can the meat trays that I've got now that I purchased at Woolworths, I can recycle those too?
Yes.
You see,
yep.
I don't...
That was the idea for the change.
Well, you see, the really interesting thing is I reckon I'm pretty average. I mean, I don't think my wife is. So I just chuck everything into the yellow bin, primarily because they've shrunk the red bin, so I'm being forced to recycle. But I don't know if it's recyclable or not. Do households do that?
There's the figures are around about 12 to 14% of the material that goes into the recycling bins ends up as being waste. And yes, that's been a problem for the various recyclers. That's been partly alleviated by the government investing money into technology that can detect the difference between the various plastics. And that's been rolled out across the country.
There is talk of policing everybody's rubbish tin at the moment. So, for example, my wife said to me actually last week, listen, they're going to put cameras on trucks to be able to discern whether or not you're putting your household rubbish that's into your recycling bin or stuff that doesn't belong, she said, looking at me. And I said, good luck on that. Are you aware of that technology? Because that would suggest that everybody's rubbish is going to be individually scrutinised to ensure it meets, well, whatever the council of the day's standard is. Have you heard about that?
Yes, I have heard about that, and we do have the camera technology to be able to detect at that sort of level. The theory being, you lift up the bin, and as it opens, the camera would take a quick look and determine really how much waste compared to recycling there is in the bin. And if it's too much, then just put it back down and say to the owner, sort it out. That sort of thing has happened manually.
So that would be, but that would be the individual task of the driver who's looking at the thing, or it happens automatically through some other form of technology?
It would be, one way would be that a number comes up on the screen for the driver, and he'll see 5%, 0%, 90%, and he could make a decision at that point.
Okay, all right. So that's, so they just won't take it, and then you get annoyed with them and stuff like that. What would be? See, I come whenever I travel to South Auckland, for example, or used to travel to Skye, I would watch a lot of people putting their rubbish into whatever bin was just to get rid of it. There is that history as well. I'm sure I'm not the only person that offends in such a way. What would be the way to stop that, though, full stop, apart from not taking it? Prosecuting? Sending notices? What? All of the above?
Yeah, well, yes, all of the above. But the most effective one really is not taking it. Give you an example. Auckland Council, when it was still just the Auckland area, decided to move from a 240 litre bin down to a 140 litre bin for rubbish, and they then moved into giving more recycling space. First week, the bins were, the 140 litre bins were filled to overfull. And what the waste people did was just to leave it, because the rules were the lid has to close. And come back the next week, and everybody was obeying it. So people do respond when there is action.
I've just been asked here, because the whole thing seems so absurd. Surely and I'm aware of the French, for example, they burn their waste in incinerators, and I imagine they're so sophisticated that they reduce also their carbon or CO2 emissions as a consequence of doing it, and indeed you can generate electricity from such. We don't have that technology in New Zealand, do we?
No, we don't. And from my perspective, that's a good thing. At the moment, there are, I think it's 3 proposals to make waste from energy.
Yes, one of them's just up one of them's up at Glenavy, which isn't very far from me at the moment, in North Otago.
That's there. Well, what that relies on is, in effect, that you have large continuous waste streams.
Yep.
And so that means there is no incentive to reduce your waste. And these things, you've got to have them for 20, 25 years for them to break even. So on top of that, you're then also killing the recycling industry, because it's much easier to throw it in a waste energy plant than it is to go through the process of separating it, sending it through the cycle again around there. So it's killing jobs.
But can I just say, I dealt with this issue as a new MP in 1990. So this is how far it goes back. I was a young new MP for Hawke's Bay in 1990. And I can remember asking whoever then was the Ministry for the Environment, or whoever it was, I think it was Simon Upton actually, who's now, ironically, the Parliamentary Environment Commissioner. And I said, why don't you just legislate?
It was at that time.
Yeah, why don't you just legislate? Why don't you just say anything that gets packaged in this country has got to meet recyclable standards and or add, a 5 or a 10 cent deposit for plastic drink containers or glass containers, which seemed to me so bloody obvious. Here we are 33 years later, still trying to look at different ways of skinning the onion, when surely the answer was just make rules.
That is an answer, but then you've got politics in there as well. So the packaging industry is a very strong lobby group, and as soon as you started to say that sort of thing, they were saying, look, it's to slightly exaggerated, it's going to kill the economy, because we're bringing in all these things from overseas, all these products, and we're also exporting all these products or another set of products overseas. And as a result of that, we wouldn't be able to do it, and the cost of everything would increase dramatically. And they would, and then the minister or the caucus or whichever group is making the decision would think, well, that's going to now cost votes because it's going to be to use a current phrase, a cost of living crisis.
Yes, but that was 33 years ago. Now is now. And there is throughout the Western world, certainly, and gosh, increasingly amongst the developing world, a concept that we should reduce the amount of packaging that we've got, we should reduce the amount of landfill, we should reduce the amount or potential for environmental pollution. Surely if we brought that legislation in now, we'd pretty much be in step with Western narrative, wouldn't we?
We would be getting towards that, but once again, when you go through the process, producers and packagers will bring up all sorts of difficulties as to why. So it would take a courageous government to do that.
Wow, God. I wouldn't have thought, given all our other problems in this world, from education to health to police, law and order, to the cost of living crisis, etc., I wouldn't have thought that's, frankly, at the top of their worry list. What do you think? I mean, people don't tend to vote on whether or not you're going to recycle your plastics, do they?
It tends to vary. We go through cycles. About once every 10 years, we go through a cycle where waste becomes an issue that a lot of people are interested in. So we went through a cycle in 2008, and that's where we got, about 2005 to 8, where we had the Waste Minimisation Act getting passed. The next cycle was about 2018 through to about 22, and we've seen a whole raft of changes occurring in the waste area. Waste, as you probably realise, is not the most sexy thing. So what happens is that you get an environmental issue that people really latch onto, and this is climate change, and then you try and tack waste into it and make some progress in that way. So it's about once every 10 years, and the next one is due towards the end of this decade at some point.
Oh, God, that's a long time to wait. Jeff, thanks very much for joining us on the show this morning, giving us a bit of background to it. When are you back from Croatia?
Well, we're back in the beginning of November.
Oh, so the election's coming up. Where are you going to vote? You're going to vote over there?
Yes, I'm already sorted out. We're going to vote online. And
can you vote online? I didn't know that.
Yeah, there is that ability for people overseas.
Oh, okay, thank you very much. All right, Jeff, you have a really good time.
You're welcome.
And thank you for informing us a little bit more and dealing with all my myths. Ta.